Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's good to see you on this glorious Sunday that we have for us to assemble here for our Bible study time. We are moving forward in Matthew 17. Just a few more things to point out in the Transfiguration, and especially as we're gathering, we are gathering, so it's to study this information for our own edification and our own upbuilding, things to get us prepared for a new week and the things that await us as we will leave here and branch out into the affairs that go on with us on a daily basis. As we consider the Transfiguration, we pointed out how that this is connected back into the discussion of Matthew 16 and that of the cross and the glory that was to follow. That in order to get to this, the cross is what stood in between Christ and that. And that for us, it's the same illustration that's given. Just as Jesus would have to put himself on the cross, Jesus says that if anybody's going to be a disciple and follow him, we have to take up our cross as well. So as we are considering glory that is on the other side of this sacrifice, with the Transfiguration, we are given a glimpse into what it is that awaits us in the resurrection. Think about this event and what is shown about not only what's happening here, but this is in fact a glimpse of what is going to happen to us. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15:51, if you remember from our 1 Corinthians study, "Behold, I show you a mystery." Now again, what is a mystery? Something that is to be revealed. Now, that's contrasted to what line of thinking that the denominational world has?
Never know.
All right, never know. This is just, it's mysterious, it's just floating out there in the ether, there's no explanation for it. No, that's not what the word mystery means. He says right here, I show you a mystery. I'm giving you the revealing of it as I'm writing this. What is it? We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. Now, changed into what exactly? I don't know. And even in this chapter, in this section of the letter, Paul addresses that. He says, you have the question of what will our body look like? And he says, thou fool. It's a foolish thing to even try to attempt to ask that because there is no explanation for it. But we do know there is a change that's coming. And we've seen that already with the Christ. But not only with the Christ, who else is with him on the Mount of Transfiguration? Moses and Elijah. What about their bodies? Those aren't physical. Those are celestial. So the change has already taken place. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. The Transfiguration gives us a glimpse into that. This is the very thing that's happening on this mountain. And you read again, chapter 16, the resurrection is mentioned with the cross. And for that matter, his incarnation is mentioned in that same breath, in that same context. Peter makes the great confession. You are the Son of God. So the glory to be received at his resurrection is foreshadowed here. Now think about this also. Christ is here transfigured. But Jesus' identity was not lost. Peter, James, John, they could look at him and still see him and know that it was him. And in the change that's described in this chapter, we again have for us in the future, we're being shown that in the resurrection, there will be change, but there will still be the continued identity after the change takes place. So when we think about, as Paul mentions, 15:51, the dead that will be raised, they'll be raised into that which is incorruptible. Those that have died and that have been buried, they have not lost their identity. That as we await to be changed and we wait to see them changed, that when the change happens, we'll be able to recognize them. And that's because if we tie in, if we're piecing things together so we're comprehending the things that we're studying, what is it that makes you who you are? What is it that makes me who I am?
Difference in appearance?
Mm-mm. What is it?
Your soul.
It's your soul. Remember, Matthew 16, we connected over to Luke's account. What shall a man profit? He shall gain the whole world and lose his soul. But what does Luke say? How does he record it? He doesn't record it as losing your soul. All right, lose your life, but there's a step beyond that. There's another descriptive term. You lose yourself. To lose one's soul is to lose one's self-identity. You're no longer who you're supposed to be, who you usually are. So you remember we went through that. I believe we went through it in our sermon, talking about Captain Ahab and Moby Dick and how his, not infatuation, obsession with chasing after the whale. And as you're reading about him through that book, it's not the same person that you started with. Same thing. If our priorities are not in line, if you're seeking after the things of the world and the world only, you're going to lose yourself. But if you're going to sacrifice and put yourself on that cross, then you'll gain yourself. So with the resurrection and this change that's going on, the soul will live on, which means that I will live on. Our loved ones that have gone on before us, they wait for us there, and it's going to be the same personality. So whatever change is going to take place, when that change takes place, on the other side, I will still be Micah. Jordan will still be Jordan. And I don't know if I can handle eternity of Jordan.
You know, the rich man and Lazarus.
Exactly.
When they went on to the other side, did it take place there? Because they still recognize each other across the gulf.
Right.
And it seems like during the resurrection, I guess during, after you're even past that time frame, but how do you look when you're in that realm?
Well,
I know that you can never be lost, I think, once you're in paradise,
Mm-hmm.
right? Aren't you to that point?
so the resurrection, the final judgment day hasn't come. So Moses and Elijah are there. They're able to be recognized also according to who they are. So does it happen?
Do we know this? Is there any scripture that lets us know that they're already transfigured into the body that they're going to have in heaven if they're in paradise?
So you have some brethren that want, and even with the 80-70 argument, there's a lot of that goes into that nuance of it. Is it going to be a physical? Do I have to? If I'm dead already before Christ comes, does Christ have to bring me back, put me into a physical body, and then change me? I don't read that from the text. So our brethren get into this argumentation with the 80-70 folk over, well, is it a bodily resurrection or is it a spiritual resurrection? I don't think that matters. That's petty. And as we've already discussed, Moses and Elijah already have a body. So this idea that the body has to be given when the resurrection takes place, I don't think is there. Because if you're going somewhere, you can't go and be naked. And Paul even addresses that if it's not in the 1 Corinthian letter, it's in the 2 Corinthian letter. So the change already takes place. When a soul dies, or when a person dies and the soul leaves the body, it's got to have something. Because it's going into the Hadean or the paradise tormented realm. So just as you're saying with Lazarus and the rich man, yeah, the rich man recognized who Lazarus was. And I wouldn't say from the standpoint of the physical body, the physical form, but there's some type of personality trait that would have given that recognition.
I just never really put it together. I never really thought about it in that. Now that we're talking about it, I'm starting thinking about the Hadean realm. And yeah, do we already have that spiritual body? Well, we have to have something.
Yeah.
We know that. But
And so even there, could it possibly be that that's some type of holding body till the actual body comes? I don't know, it could be. But the fact remains that there's something. While most individuals just have this steadfast thought that no, nothing has transpired until, like Jamie was bringing up, the final day, and then you get changed. And it's like, no, there's some type of change that's going on here. So just got to try to figure those things into it. Now again, we're going off of some assumption just because this is all that we have given about it. We don't have any more details on it. So like I'm saying, could it be that this is just a holding till something else is, then we get into, some other change? Very well could be. But it could also very well be that this is them already being changed because they're dead. And with the passages like 1 Corinthians 15:51, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, if memory serves me correctly, I don't read of there's no description of any change taking place with those that have died before. They're just called up and they're raised up and they go up. But then for us that remain, we're the ones that are talked about being changed. So, but then I could just be forgetting about some other passage just because we're kind of shooting from the hip with what we're talking about. So yeah, it's one of those interesting things to study on. But at the end of it, we're just kind of working off a little bit of information that we've been given. All right. Anything else? Are you sure?
I'll develop my thought.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
We'll come back.
All right.
Should take over the class.
Let's see here. So, right. Yeah. So whatever change takes place. Now, what this should do for us, like we're reading this and we're studying it. Okay. What's the application? This should inspire us. For Peter, James, and John to be able to see what they saw on this mountain, and then to know that this is possible for all of us to see. It's like, man, I want to see that. Well, guess what? You want to see that, you better make sure you're living how you need to. Now, granted, all are going to end up seeing this because all are going to die and all are going to change. But if you're wanting to see a change into glory and not a change into punishment, then this is what we're discussing. This is the reward that's at the end of everything that we're trying to do. The standard of living that we're trying to meet. The sacrifices that we're trying to make. Why make them? What's the goal? What's the purpose? What's the reason? This is it. Glory waits for us. And so when we're considering that, like you take individuals that are planning for a trip, planning for a vacation, and in Luke's account, that's actually how paradise is described. That word paradise, I can't remember the exact text. I can check my notes at the end here. But the word paradise is used in Luke's account, and it actually means a pleasure park. So either you have the idea of like a theme park or just, one of the city parks that you have around you. And how's it look? Everything's manicured, everything's taken care of, everything should be relatively peaceful. We have some issues with our parks. But it's just, that's what the view is, of paradise. Okay, how do you feel about that? When you're trying to take a trip, we were planning for Yellowstone. What's on your mind the whole entire time as you're getting ready? The very idea is right there. We're getting ready for this trip. That's all we're thinking about. So it's the same picture of paradise. It's the same scene for heaven. We are aspiring to this. It gives us a preview of what awaits us. But then just to think about also our weaknesses that we have in going through this life as we live here. And that someday, if the cross means to me what it should, then it's not just a changing my relationship with God. That's included. But it's also a changing of my life entirely. And that if I am changing myself while I'm here, then there's another change that awaits me. So I am very thankful for the information that we have about the Transfiguration. Because as we said, it removes some difficulties about the understanding of the resurrection, death, a little bit of the other realm that's there. it removes some of the shadow and the uncertainty that can creep in about those concepts. So it impresses the importance of our studies that we're going through. Why are we doing this? Because we're trying to make it to glory. There are things that I want to see. Then okay, you need to live this way. You need to do these things. You need to put these things into practice. To view this picture of the physical body and it's transfigured, that's going to be amazing. I don't want to miss out on that. So I'm also thankful that when Jesus was changed, Moses and Elijah were there to talk to him about the cross. Because as we studied last week, they were not just talking for themselves about the cross and what he should accomplish, the mission that is to be completed at Jerusalem. But they were there talking to Jesus and asking him those questions for you and for me. And that all of those things, as we're picturing this, are going to travel with us through the rest of our study. As we said last week, Jesus is turning a corner in his work and in his mission. When we read Luke's account, Luke 9:51, it is stated that Samaria would not receive him as he traveled through there because his face was as though it were set to go to Jerusalem. The transfiguration, glory, crucifixion, resurrection is the next piece of the puzzle. And he's focused on it. That's his aim. That's his goal. But when we also think about what's happening here and the change that's to go on in our lives, there's another element that we can take into consideration and to try to piece into our lives. Now, before we discuss that, any questions, comments on what we've been through so far? Any extra thoughts that got developed?
Not quite. All I was going to say was that with regard to the change, it was there. We saw it, so it was happening at that point, and it wasn't going to be sometime into the future.
Yeah.
And as the previous week, when we're talking about how did they know that it was Elijah and Moses, it was their soul.
Mm-hmm.
The soul was recognized by their soul, and we don't really know, and it doesn't go into it, and as Adrian brought it up, they know each other, but that's the only indication where Jesus is still Jesus, here breathing.
Right.
But he's it's like he's stepping into the light of heaven, in a sense, by still being here, so we can see that that's where we need to have him.
Yeah.
That's all I was really
Yeah,
gonna say.
that's all good. That's all good.
So.
All right. So if nothing else, then we'll move on to this next thought that actually comes from Luke's account. So again, the importance of making sure that we're getting all the pieces of the information on all of these accounts. Luke gives us extra glimpses or extra information. Verse 28, and it came to pass about 8 days after these sayings, he took Peter and John and James and went up into a mountain to pray. Matthew just tells us he went up to a mountain, but Luke tells us he went up to pray. And that's the point I want us to think about. Prayer can also alter us. Now, it's not going to change us to the degree as we have here being pictured with Jesus. But prayer can, in fact, transform us. You just think of a Christian loaded down with care, with trial, even with sin. And through penitence and confession, going to God and laying those things aside. And the transformation that'll take place. Care brings stress. Stress brings anxiety. Stress and anxiety bring fear. and you lay all of that down, what will that do for you? Brings peace, brings a new person. So when we're considering, again, transformation that's taking place in our lives, it's not only a transformation or transforming only of our relationship with God, but it will change our disposition. We'll be more pleasant, more friendly. They're more desirable to actually be around. And that because we implement this. That just as we said with Peter walking out on the water with Jesus, how did that start?
He was fearful.
All right, what'd you say?
He was fearful.
All right, he was afraid, but then the next step was he asked. And we made the point that so many times we miss out on what God has to offer because we don't ask. And we miss out on change that can take place in our lives because we miss out on this simple element.
But he also asked for the right thing.
Yeah, that's right. He was asking something very specific. And so even James writes about that same aspect, that you ask and you receive not. Why?
You ask amiss.
All right, one is you ask amiss. What's the other?
You don't have the faith.
All right, you do not ask in faith.
That's rats because I was after church service. I was going to go to the lake to see if I can walk on water. It's a joke. Sorry. Yeah.
And what it is that makes us difficult with our prayer life is the fact that anybody expecting to receive an immediate answer?
Sometimes.
I mean, you go through and you read of these individuals involved in their prayer life, and for example, like the book of Daniel. And in one of those situations where Daniel is found praying, an angel appears, and he says to Daniel, God sent me before your prayers even made it. We don't have that kind of experience to where when we're involved in our prayer life, what's it like? What does it feel like?
Eternity.
Huh?
Eternity before it's even answered.
Yeah. Is anybody listening? Or is it just going into the air? And that we're needing to have involved in our thought process when we're going through our prayer life, not just the miraculous events that take place, but the providential events that take place. And providence is something that works within the realm of this physical world. That, like with Joseph and his brethren, how they treated him, and the very fact that Ishmaelites just happened to be passing by on their way to Egypt. Well, God had a hand in that. How? I don't know specifically, but it wasn't a direct operation that God just made them take that road, take that route, and we just happen to be slave traders. It's those everyday events that we go through to where we just have to sit back and wonder, to where Paul has to say, perhaps these things are happening in such a fashion. And if they line up with the requests that we're making, then we need to give God thanks for that. But then the other side of that, when we're praying for things and they don't go according to plan, and even to the degree where they don't even happen, then what's the perhaps in that?
Perhaps it's for growth.
Perhaps it's for growth. What'd you say?
Or he said no.
Okay. Or the answer was no.
Or not yet.
Or not yet. There's different ways to work with it, to
Somebody
stay
gave an
motivated
example
and encouraged.
Of a little child that would ask their parent to drive a car, and the answer is no, because they're not yet ready. So sometimes sometimes God's answer is the same because He knows that eventually we're going to be ready, but just not at this moment.
Right.
So the answer may be no at the time, but it's not a definite no forever. It's sometimes it might be we just have to wait for it.
So one of those greatest elements that people are all the time praying for and being patient, well, guess what's involved in a good prayer life? Patience. Waiting. So it's a transformation of our disposition, as we said. But when we pray properly, knowing attitudes that have been wrong towards brethren, towards family members, towards friends, and that prayer has the ability to make those things better. In knowing what the Scripture says, how I'm supposed to be, and recognition, and that's what prayer really is. When I'm going to God and I'm praying for certain things, that's me recognizing about changes that I need to make. Help me with this, help me in this growth, so on and so forth. Okay, what is the first step in fixing a problem?
Recognizing
Is the recognition that you have a problem. So in recognizing that you have a problem is the first step. What's the next step?
Taking action.
Taking action on it. So with our prayer life, we're learning. It's not just a thing of, okay, I'm putting it over in God's hands and He's just going to mold me over and recreate me. No. He's given you the information. Now it's your turn to do something with the information. And that's a further example of praying for God, give us this day our daily bread. All right? When I pray that, what's the next step? Got to go work for it. That's the means that He has given for us to provide. All right? I need help in changing these things. All right, here's what you need to do according to the Scripture. So with Him going up to pray and this transfiguration that's taking place, there's application for us as to what can help us, what can be involved in taking part in some of that change today. So it improves, it transforms relationships that we have with one another. That relationships can be mended, relationships can be fixed if this change is taking place now. All right? Thoughts, questions, comments on that? Okay, move forward. 5 through 6. Then answered Peter and said unto Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If thou wilt, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for thee, one for Moses, and one for Elias. While he yet spake, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud which said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their face and were sore afraid. Here we have Peter, and he's involved in his usual problem. Speaking up where he doesn't need to. Now, chapter 16, he speaks up and it's good. Now here, it's almost like a force of habit, to where he is a Jew and he is in a mode, or he's in a frame of thinking like with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as they went around traveling through the land of Canaan and miraculous things took place in certain areas. What do you have them doing?
building a tabernacle.
Building a tabernacle or some type of monument to recognize what it is that's transpired there. When the children of Israel crossed over the Red Sea, or not the Red Sea, when the children of Israel crossed over Jordan to go into the Promised Land, what did they do on the other side?
Did it build an altar or build a...
Well, you're on it. I can't remember if it's actually described as an altar, but there were certain people that were to carry a stone for each tribe through the through the Jordan River And as they got on the other side, they then stacked those stones where they crossed. And 12 stones representing the 12, one for each tribe. You get over there, and that stood as a monument of what took place for you to come into the promised land. So right there's a possibility as to why Peter's thinking the way that he is. This has gone on all throughout Israel's history. But at the same time, when we're thinking about what Peter is doing here, as we said, we're going through the study, and we're getting a study of psychology. We're learning about human behavior. How do people think? What makes them think this way? And individuals can fall into the same trap that Peter's wanting to do here. Many times we reach a point in our lives, and as we're keeping track of our progress and our development, and what do people want to try to do at certain points where they think that they've made it.
Go back into their old ways, I guess. Is that what you're trying to hint at?
No, not quite. I mean, you think about, oftentimes, so let's put it into some weightlifting terminology. When you're lifting weights and you're trying to get stronger, oftentimes what do you hit?
Plateau.
You hit a plateau. Now, a plateau is a high point. I mean, it's good, but with somebody who's really training, what are they going to try to do?
Keep climbing.
They're going to try to break through that. Now, so a little bit to what Adrian is saying is correct, that when we, in our spiritual walk, in our spiritual life, and other things, we hit a plateau and it's just kind of like, well, okay, I can't go any further. This is good enough. And we try to stop there. Now, remember where they are. They're up on top of a mountain. And here's this great thing that's happened. Peter, James, and John are there to witness it, and Peter says, well, let's camp out here. Let's build 3 tents, and let's just stay here. No need to continue on. No need to go on further. No need to continue this progress. And, to a large degree, I had this feeling going on my first hike with Jordan and Reese. It's just like, you know what, this is far enough. Why can't we just stop here?
And that was just your first step onto the mountain.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's just, that's how we do in life. It's like, all right, this is difficult. This is hard. Yeah, what Peter, James, and John and all the apostles are going through, it's difficult, but it's just going to get harder as you go on. Well, then let's just stop here. Okay, and if we had stopped, in which I wasn't saying that, by the way. I was complaining, but I wasn't saying let's just stop. What do you miss out on?
The beauty.
If you stop, you miss out on the glory. You don't make it to the top. And you don't get to see the scene.
We didn't even make it to the top.
Well, it's good enough for me. But you see, as we're going through, we're making these physical... Where am I going? I've lost myself. There we are. As we're going through, and we're needing to make these daily types of applications. And this is the thing that not only we as Christians are dealing with, but even within the denominational world, how they view Christianity. Well, okay, I've got this one thing that I'm really good at, and they don't work on anything else. And as we're looking at the life of a Christian, we have it being shown to us. You know what? It's not just one element that you're needing to work on. It's all of these elements. Now, that can be overwhelming. That can be daunting. But again, we're needing to flip our perspective. It gives us purpose. It gives us a mission with what we're doing. It gives us a reason to get out of bed in the morning. To know that, all right, there is something that awaits me that I can get stronger and I can get better at. And with Peter saying, well, let's stay here and let's make 3 tabernacles. No, the work's not done yet. Your training is not completed. So as we're being shown here by this, by this event. What's happening with the Transfiguration is great, but this is not what you're looking for. There's something else still coming, so you got to keep going. This life does not hold this for us, is what we're being shown. You want to make it to glory? You've got to press on. Can't camp out here. Or if you are camping out, then you got to be ready to pack your stuff again and move along. It's what we see with Abraham. It's what we saw with the children of Israel as they're wandering in the wilderness. And then even Peter ends up writing about it. What are we as we go through this life? Pilgrims. Wanderers. Sojourners. But do we really live that way? We have the mentality of planting roots, nesting. That's not what we're doing here. We're not staying here on top of this mountain. And even with Jesus and his apostles here, again, we're going to find them coming down. So we have being presented for us the need for mission, the need for purpose, and for something that's bigger than we are. And that's going to be illustrated as they come down from the mountain. There's something waiting for them when they come down. Now, Peter makes this claim, but a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from heaven that said, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased, hear ye him." Important factor, that while Moses and Elijah are important figures, their job is done. Their work is over. Now, the one that is here that we're needing to listen to and to observe all that he commands, and which even then, what Jesus is presenting is not any different than what Moses and the prophets were presenting earlier. Some of the details may be different, but the ultimate message is the same. Faith, trusting in God, and obedience to what he commands. Now, when this happens, we then have this description, and when the disciples heard it, they fell on their face and were sore afraid. That word sore means violent. Violently afraid. Vehemently, or in a high degree. Now, this is the proper description throughout Scripture. Anytime anybody met an angel or saw any type of showing, presentation that God would give of himself, it is sore afraid. Now that's important because you contrast that to the denominational view of how they want to give the scene of meeting God. Exactly. Just, oh, it's wonderful. Whatever. And it's like, no, if you really were coming in the presence of God, we would be seeing a very different reaction take place. But then you also consider this word afraid. And you might have already seen it because I'm still getting used to my new remote. What do you think this word afraid is? Any ideas? Anybody want to take a stab? Just a guess? Huh? Awe. Okay, like reverential. Okay? Because that many times that's what the word afraid or fear can mean.
Would it be like wanting to hide or just out of your mind scared?
Okay.
Terrified.
All right. Yeah, the very fact that you have sore and it's a violent fear is going to lead into that direction. What does that look like? No. Phobia. How does a person behave when they have a phobia?
Panic. Out of their mind.
Somebody that's arachnophobic, afraid of spiders.
Jordan, do you know anybody like that?
What happens when an arachnophobic sees a little spider crawl across the floor? Just as you guys said, they lose their minds. screaming bloody murder over a little spider. It's an uncontrollable fear. That's what's being pictured here with the disciples, with the apostles. Now, the reason why we're wanting to point this out is because we have them, and who are they afraid of? They're afraid of God, they're afraid of the Father, the one that's speaking from heaven. But then, read what happens next. Here they are, so afraid, Jesus came and touched them. And said, "Arise, and be not afraid." And when they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no man save Jesus only. Why is that important?
You don't have to fear Father.
Because of the comfort that Jesus gave.
So kind of yes and kind of no to what Jordan said, that we don't need to fear the Father.
Because if you've seen Jesus, you've seen the Father.
Okay.
And Jesus is there with them.
Okay. So when we are considering this and that, okay, Peter has said something that they would like to do that doesn't need to be done, and even with the response, I mean, there's no reason to read any type of tone or aggravation, indignation into what's being said. Just simply says, there was a voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased, hear ye him." But when we think about our lives and going through and we make mistakes, and when we make mistakes, what's the picture that we end up getting with God?
He's mad at me.
He's mad, wrathful, full of indignation. But that's not the scene. It's not the picture. Here they are, so afraid for what they've done. Jesus came and touched them. Be not afraid. It's the same action that was taken with the lepers. It's the same action as the apostles were in the boat and they're being tossed in the sea. And Jesus said, "Be of good comfort. It is I, be not afraid."
Okay. Can we develop this a little bit more? In the sense that, granted, what you said, people are afraid when they make mistakes. And in the Bible, it does talk about God's wrath. But is that in connection with those who have completely turned their back? I mean, how do we present this to people who do have this view of God, that He's the scary God of the Old Testament, and then here's Jesus, the loving, compassionate?
Okay. So the key to that is that people need to be involved in their own daily study. Because if you are only coming to the assembly at 1 hour during the week, and that myself and others that are giving presentations, we've only got a limited amount of time to try to get a thought across in a presentation. And then we go back into an Old Testament passage like you brought up. Let's just say, for example, Isaiah. And we use any one of the many passages where Isaiah talks about judgment that's coming on the people of God. I do not have enough time to properly present what is happening in the book of Isaiah. And when that happens, we will then end up getting this presentation of the children of Israel in the book of Isaiah as though God is reacting to their first offense. But is that what's happening in the book of Isaiah? No. God has been patient with Israel and been long-suffering with them. And what we're reading of in Isaiah is when the clock runs out. And to get a fuller picture as to what's happening in Isaiah, you'd also have to read from the Kings and the Chronicles. because Isaiah is prophesying during the time frame of certain kings. Same thing with the minor prophets, Amos, Joel, Micah. They're prophesying at the same time that Isaiah is. So right there you have being presented the multiple prophets that are being sent in trying to give warning. You need to repent. So to counteract that and battle that, people need to be involved in this kind of study.
If you look how many times Peter actually denies Christ and
Right.
goes against him, this is just one more example of how God is compassionate and reaching out like you're saying. It's not damnation. Okay, you've reached your 77 times 7 times.
Right, yeah, exactly. That's the whole illustration.
My bad.
And even with that, bringing up the denial of Christ, Jesus knew that was going to happen. So what about when it comes to our shortcomings? God knows it's going to happen. And even to the point when it's going to happen. But we have all of these illustrations that's to remind us and to impress upon our minds, what is it that God is expecting of us? And I think we mentioned this, I kept saying this through either in the beginning of this study, it was definitely in our 1 Corinthians study. In the life of a Christian, what is it that God expects and demands?
Obedience.
Okay, obedience.
Your love towards him.
All right.
Steadfastness.
All right. Steadfastness is a good word. Faithfulness. Does God expect perfection out of us? No. How do I know that? Jesus knew that Peter was going to deny him. And he didn't give up on him.
A just man falls 7 times and rises up again.
Is that the problem? No, that's a psalm, right?
It's Proverbs 24:16.
Okay. So a righteous man will fall.
Wicked shall fall into mischief.
But we get back up. So even with the situation of Peter that's being brought up, what if he had given up? What if he had just said, you know what? There's no way God is going to forgive me for what I've done. And he just walked away. Well, okay, then you're making that decision. But it goes into the parable of the prodigal son. What about the one that goes away? Fine, go away. Live how you want to live. Now, of course, in the parable, he came to himself, but what if he didn't come to himself? What if he had just died out there? Well, the father says to the brother that stayed home, your brother was dead, but now is alive. What does sin do? Sin separates. It brings death. Had he died in the pig pen, then he would have died lost. But he came to himself, repented, and came home. And who was there waiting for him? It's the Father. This is a difficult concept of balance. Because what fear creeps in, and it's actually, Paul brings it up when he writes his letter to the Romans. Jesus touched them and says, be not afraid. What's another word that could be put in the place of this scene? No. Something that God offers.
Be comforted.
All right, so when we're thinking about this comfort, be not afraid, be of peace, be of good comfort.
Relief.
Peace.
All right.
Someone said grace.
Who said it?
Someone back there.
Who said grace? I don't know. It wasn't her.
Did she say something?
There's no way. How would you have heard that? Anyways. Grace. Now,
Thank you.
what's the danger with grace?
Thinking that there's too much grace. Well, there is enough, but that covers everything.
What was the fear, or what was the question that Paul raised to the Romans about grace?
Should we keep sinning?
If God be gracious, if there's mercy, then let's sin so we can get more grace. There's a danger that individuals will take advantage of grace. And that danger is there. The very fact that Paul is stating it acknowledges it. Yeah, this is there. But we can't do that. But at the same time that individuals cannot abuse grace, what can we not do?
Not talk about it.
We cannot withhold it. But as we're saying, the situation is always going to be different depending on the person. You have that rebellious man, 1 Corinthians chapter 5, should have been rebuked, should have been corrected. He hasn't. You're letting this go. What's the reaction? Or what is the action that needs to take place? Cut him off. You're gone. Now, even with that, there's still grace in that. You can come back. But if we're not careful, then we can be that person who's being cut off, 1 Corinthians chapter 5, can be right here so afraid, walking away, being mad, and just saying, well, all right, they're never going to forgive me. God will never forgive me. That's not how this is working. Now, even what Jesus is presenting, we've already looked at Matthew 5, 6, and 7, or Matthew 5 specifically. If you have aught with your brother, you leave your gift, you go and be reconciled with him, then you come back. But even Jesus is going to present in just the next chapter, we're in 17, what's the discussion in 18? About offenses, trespasses. If your brother sin against you, you go to him, show him his fault. Okay, what happens if he doesn't hear you? See, that's grace, number one. What if he doesn't hear you?
Okay.
You bring 2 or 3 witnesses. It's grace number 2. What if he doesn't hear them?
Congregation.
You take it before the congregation. What's the congregation to do?
Censure.
They go and acknowledge or confront this brother. Now, with the congregation that we have here, 1, 2, 3, 8 of us, 9 of us, 10, whatever.
We're all here with Brandon.
So with the one attempt of grace, and then the 2 following attempts of grace, how many other attempts of grace are then being shown? Well, a congregation of 10, you've got 10 more opportunities of grace. Take a congregation of 50, you got 50 opportunities for grace and repentance. What if they don't hear them? You treat him as a heathen and a publican. When we're thinking about our attempts to reconcile with a soul, it really is what Jesus presented, 70 times 7. So when we're thinking about church discipline and going through and trying to correct, there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of hesitancy on the other side of the person that's needing to be corrected. No, 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 you don't need to feel that way. This is how we're coming. Don't be afraid. We're all going to make mistakes. You're in the correction seat right now. Could be in the future. I need to be in the correction seat. And if I'm going to be in the correction seat, how would I want the people to come to me? compassionately, graceful. But discipline doesn't get carried out this way.
Well, in Galatians chapter 1, when it talks about correcting, or chapter
2.
6, verse.
Oh, yeah, 6, 1 and 2. Yeah, yeah.
The requirement is meekness and humility.
Yeah. And those that are spiritual.
Which it just talked about the fruit of the Spirit, so it's all of those 9 fruits of the Spirit combined into one and having a handle on that.
Yeah.
And that's what it takes to correct.
I was going to say it's bad when you're in a congregation that doesn't want to implement that. You know, sometimes it's our fear of trying to bring a sin forward and present it to the congregation, and they don't want to hear it. And so, you know, where do you go from there? You're trying to make corrections correctly.
Yeah.
According to God's word, and you take it to one-on-one, and then 2 others or 3 others are with you, and then you take it before the congregation, and they all blow up because how dare you bring this out? And it's like it's a wonder that we even learn anything in these other congregations.
You moved to Montana, and that's what happened.
But even as we're thinking about from that aspect, in bringing out the correction of others, what about corrections we need to make personally? Is this oftentimes not the way how we feel about it? There's fear, hesitation, reservation because, well, what are people going to think? How are they going to react? How are they going to treat me if I bring this forward and saying that I need help with this? The mentality should be this. If this is who we're supposed to be, and this is how we're supposed to be, then this changes everything about the dynamics that we're supposed to have. There shouldn't be any sore afraid, phobia to bring up cares, concerns, problems. That if we are of a humble heart, if we are in fact practicing the things of the Beatitudes in that beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, then how should we picture God? Just like this. He'll touch us. And He'll tell us, don't be afraid. But too many times we have this mindset about God and the things that we do, and that's not who we're trying to be. We're not trying to behave like Old Testament Israel and just go further and further into our wickedness and into our sin. That's not who we're trying to be. We are trying to do these things, and right here we're being shown a falling short. And when that happens, this should be the picture. Don't run from God. Don't run away from Him, run towards Him. Do not run away from the brethren. Run towards the brethren. But there's not enough of this that goes on because at the same time, too many of our brethren want to act like and pretend like they don't have any problems. So why don't we get this picture with a lot of congregations, with a lot of our brethren? Because our brethren want to play around with the idea like they don't have any problems. Then there's no need to practice this. And then if we're all playing this game where we don't have any problems, and then you come up with some type of problem, what's my mentality going to be? How dare you? How could you? What do you mean, how could I? You should be expecting this. But we don't do that. And because there is the idea, there's the mentality within Christianity that, well, yeah, we should know better. We do know better. But that's the problem with sin. That even though we do know better, we're still going to do it. And that's the whole discussion of Romans chapter 7. The things that I know that I should do, what does Paul say? I don't do those things. And the things that I know that I shouldn't do, what do I do with those things? I do them. Because there's a struggle going on. There's a battle, there's a war, there are two spirits, two laws that are working. And that we're constantly trying to press down the other. And so if we are fighting and we are warring like Paul is describing, when we fall short in the battle, what's going to happen? What happens when another soldier falls down? Go back to Reese's sermon.
Battle buddy.
Somebody comes along to pick you up. So all the stuff that we're going through finds its application in this. So don't separate yourself. Don't cut yourself out. And that's going to be the discussion in Matthew 18. The one sheep that goes astray, you got to go get him. Why? Because there's strength in numbers. When you're out there by yourself, you're vulnerable. So how do we get people to picture this? They've got to go through this kind of study. We've got to be real with each other. To where, like when we have the gentleman that comes in and visits with us, how do we picture him?
A lost soul needing to be taken in.
See somebody that's untouchable, set to the side? What can you offer for us? What can you bring? No. Be merciful towards him. And tell him. You don't have to be afraid. That we're all on this journey together. And we're all trying to make it through. But then even making other connections where this is even shown in the Old Testament. To where, like Jamie said, some individuals want to look at the Old Testament, there's just vengeance and wrath, indignation all throughout. Well, let's look at this. 1 Kings 19. This is Elijah. He's already caused it to be a famine in the land of Israel because of the wickedness of King Ahab. Chapter 18 is the great competition with the prophets of Baal, where they could not perform the sacrifice and the miracle as Elijah could perform, and all of the servants of Baal were slain. Jezebel then says, I've heard about what you've done. And she says, let the same thing happen to me that happened to the prophets if I do not kill you today. And when he saw that, he arose and went for his life. Here's Elijah on the run. Came to Beersheba, which belonged to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree, and he requested for himself that he might die, and said, It is enough. Now, O Lord, take my life, for I am not better than my fathers. So here's Elijah, and he's in the same position with Peter. All right, God, I've done all of these wonderful things for you. I've even put my life on the line. Had this great competition with the prophets of Baal. Okay, that's all. It's enough. That's all that needs to be done. No, the work's not done. But you see, that's the mentality. We've gone to this point. What more do you need from me? Well, there's plenty more. And just as with the working out situation, it's all mental. When your brain is telling you can't go anymore, you've got a little bit left in the tank. In that hike, it's just how much further can we stop? No. You've got some more. You can keep going. But as we have this being said about Elijah, notice the reaction that God has towards him. And as he lay and slept under a juniper tree, behold, that an angel touched him and said unto him, Arise and eat. The very picture that we have of Jesus is now being presented in the Old Testament. Jesus touched the apostles. Jesus touched the lepers. Here's God with His servant. He touched him and said, "Arise and eat." He took care of him. But it's not done. And he looked, and behold, there was a cake baking on the coals and a cruse of water at his head. And he did eat and drink and laid him down again. And the angel of the Lord came again the second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee." How does God view His servants when they get tired and are downtrodden and just want to give up? Is this how we picture God? Oftentimes, no. Oftentimes we go to the view that, well, God is just sitting in heaven and He's just stewing. How could you, Elijah? How is that you're just giving up now? How can you lay down? What does God know about us?
Everything.
Huh?
Everything.
Everything. Hairs of our head are numbered. He's looking at His servant and it's like, yeah, you've been through a lot. Rest. Sleep. Eat. Drink. But then you notice, okay, it's time to get up. Journey's not over. The battle's not done. And it's the same thing that's going on with the apostles on top of the mountain. Hey, it's time to get up. The work's not done. Whoa, how did that happen? And we have that being shown in the next section. We won't get into it. But as they came down from the mountain, can't just stay up there. Got to come down into the valley. And he comes down, and as he comes down from the mountain, who's there waiting for him? Somebody in need. The work doesn't stop. And we can't reach a point to where it's okay, here we are, and we're up here. People know that we're up here. They can come to us. It's not how it works. I wish it was, because it would make the work a lot easier, but no, we've got to go down, come down, and be where they, I want to say be, but where they are. As Jesus touched the apostles are needing to come down, and they're needing to touch others, minister to others, serve others. So what about with us today? Here we are. We're together as the church. But what we're doing can't just stay here. Can't just stop here. When we leave and when we come down from the mountain, it's when the work starts. When we leave this place, it's when the labor comes in. So, we'll pick up here, 9 through 13, and move a little bit further. Any thoughts, questions, comments as we close?
Talk about this proverb when Peter just keeps going out. Even a fool, when he holds his peace, is counted wise.
Oh, yeah.
So Peter's not listening to the proverb.
And it's not only in that situation. In this chapter, at the end, Peter's going to do it again. When they come asking about, does your master pay tribute? And Peter's answer is, well, yeah, he pays tribute. He spoke up when he shouldn't have. And even then, just like speaking up when he shouldn't have, he should have gone and asked Jesus, like, well, do you pay tribute? Are you need to pay this tithe or this payment over to the temple? Had he held his tongue, gone and asked the proper question, then he would have gotten a better answer than what he gave. But we'll deal with that when we get there. All right. And so nothing else, then we'll stop there.